Nature. Beautiful, diverse, complex, and a pain in the ass to recreate in 3D. So here's how I do scenes like these. But before we open Blender, let's act like we are some nerds and do some research. You probably think you know how a meadow or a forest looks like, but you'd be surprised. I noticed it pays off when you take some time to think about where your render takes place, what plants grow there, and what time of year it is. For example, in this picture we have some grass, which covers pretty much the whole ground. On top there are these plants with these yellow flowers, which are obviously Ficaria verna. They grow in a more patchy way, kinda similar to a noise texture. Also there are some daisies, which tend to scatter around more. And finally there's always some sort of debris, like old leaves and sticks. We can now take all these informations and use it in Blender. Let's talk assets, because they are probably the most important part. I personally don't like to spend any money if I don't have to, so most of the assets I use are actually free from Polyheaven and such. I'm also getting into making some of them myself, but this might get a separate video. Anyway, this is a case where paying off really pays off. For this scene and many others I used some from this pack. It's only $5 and really worth it. Before there was light, there was a floor. To get one, you have different options. You can use one of Blender's landscapes, which are pretty versatile and have different presets. Use a height map you can download from the World Wide Web and feed it into a displacement modifier. Or create one yourself by sculpting a plane, which I tend to do. Now, to get these plans going, select the floor and create a new GeoNode setup. First, we want to randomly distribute points on the faces of our mesh. For that, we use a distribute points on faces node. Set it from random to Poisson disk, so the density factor appears. This one will get important later. The density max slider determines how many plants there will be. So in case you are working with a bigger floor and see a lot of points right now, it saves you a crash when you set it to 0.01 for now. I'm starting with Fern as my first plant. For that I have these 6 different models, which I'm putting into a collection. Usually the more assets you use, the more natural it looks. Back in GeoNodes, get an instance on points node and drag and drop your plant collection next to it. Make sure to check separate children, reset children, set it to relative and check pick instance. Otherwise it won't show properly. Right now all these objects are the same size and rotation. To make it look more diverse, we can use a random value node and connect it to the scale. 0 to 1 means basically 0 to 100% of the original mesh size. So something like 0.6 to 1 is good for now. To fix the rotation, copy the random value node, but since we want to be able to control all the angles, set it to vector. We only want to rotate it on the z-axis, so set all the values to 0 and then crank the minimum z value to the left and the maximum value to the right. To get our floor back, let's use a join geometry node and connect the group input and the instance with it. To have the most control over our scene, I like to set it up so we can draw on our mesh and make plants appear there, which is not as hard as it sounds. For that, let's make use of vertex groups. Create a new one and rename it after your plant. In GeoNodes, connect the earlier mentioned density factor with an empty slot of your group input. In the Modifiers tab there is now an input and we can insert the vertex group here. Now the fun part. Hold Ctrl Tab, switch to weight paint mode and draw like you're a god who is destined to be a creator of worlds, birth giver to nature, structure of life throughout eternity. The objects are scattered on top of the faces, but the weight paint uses polygons for its weight informations. So if you want more control, a higher mesh density makes sense. I usually work with a high density in the front, which gets lower the further away it's from the camera. We are almost done, but we can create 2 more extra settings. First, we can make it so that the plants grow smaller the lighter or the greener the paint is. For that, we use a math node, set it to multiply and connect the group input and the rotation node with it. Now use another math node to adjust the strength of your weight paint. The second setting, which only applies to some plants, is to make it so that the plants not point up to the global z value, but to the z value of the plane it's scattered on. Simply said, it rotates with the mesh. This, for example, makes sense for grass, but not so much for trees. To make it, we only need a rotate rotation node. Connect the upper value with the rotation node we used before and the lower one with the rotation of your distribution node. This is basically the whole setup. In case you don't like to draw, you can also use a noise texture with a color ramp. This also works better on a high poly mesh. You can also put all these nodes into a group by selecting them and pressing Ctrl G. Then connect all the important settings with your group input, and if you tap out of it, you have it nice and organized. When you duplicate a group, they are still linked to each other, so if you change settings in one, the other one will do the same. To change that, press the little number next to the name. Also change the seed with every duplicated group, otherwise they will distribute on the same points. From here on, we can duplicate our group, create a new vertex group, rename it after the new plant, connect the density factor to a new input like before, insert the new vector group and draw on. You can switch between vertex groups by selecting them in the Data tab. For objects which lay on top of grass like leaves or sticks, you can use a transform geometry node to lift it up a little. Just adjust the Z location value. The origin of your plant basically determines the root of it, so make sure it's at the lowest center of the object. I've had a few cases in which the name of my vertex group didn't appear in the GeoNode. In that case, you can just write it out. Alright, that's it. I put together a BlendFile with an example that you can download. And there are also 2 plants and a ground texture I made just for you. Okay, have a good one.